Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. So this video is about my official stance on the European governing class. It's important to note that I've waited until a very key turning point where they think that they're doing something and they're sabotaging me to the extreme to make this official stance video, as I gave them every opportunity to do the right thing. My official stance on the European governing class is the same as my official stance on the Jewish governing class and the LGBT governing class. So it's all three in one. Before we get into that, I'd like to point out that it was very wise of me to explain to you the difference between a conservative and a liberal using the textbook definition, which is different than how it is used today. You know, liberals today, so-called liberals, leftists, are said to stand for, child sex changes, trannies in sports, gender-neutral bathrooms, ineffective solutions like DEI, controversial ideas that they won't get straight like CRT, and all sorts of illogical thinking, Antifa, what have you. The right wing these days is even worse, and we'll get to that. So a liberal is someone who's open-minded, okay, but not retarded. They're not open-minded to, cutting their legs off for no reason, for example. They're open-minded within reason, especially when it comes to matters of racial supremacy and the social order. A conservative is adverse to change. It is actually the conservative and not the liberal. When you go by the textbook definition, they want big government in one form or another. The government extends from the governing class. So whether they mostly use the central government or state governments or local governments is of little consequence. Big government is a bunch of conservatives forcing their way. Part of the conservative agenda includes change. They want to make certain groups more gay and certain groups seem less gay, at least, so that they can argue that they're superior to the groups that they make more gay. So you'll see things that seem like that there's some kind of gay, modern, democratic agenda, but it's really the conservative agenda. And again, it's a little tricky here. Conservatives actually have a gay agenda, not liberals. Okay? The liberals, when we're talking about how it's used in the mainstream these days, but not when we're talking about the textbook definition. Again, the textbook definition of liberal does not include pro-gay. Being open-minded doesn't mean you default with gay rights and a gay agenda. That's the democratic agenda in popular culture these days. That's the progressive agenda in popular culture these days. That's the so-called liberal agenda in popular culture these days, and not the textbook definition. Liberal idea. So conservatives are adverse to change. They say things like they want to follow in their forefathers' footsteps, and that's not what the founding fathers wanted, and things of this nature. They say things like that they're white. What do you expect? They say things like, don't make it about race. Or is it because he's white? Or is it because he's Jewish? Or is it because he's gay? They use all kinds of psychology like their forefathers historically did. Adolf Hitler was said to have studied the eugenicists in America. People who came up with Jim Crow and the slave codes and segregation and Reconstruction, and the people who sabotaged so-called Reconstruction and what have you. The most pronounced and fanatic conservatives in history were whites, Jews, and LGBT people. If you don't believe me, look into the history of Greek societies. Look into the history of homosexuality in Crete and Greece and Rome. It's pretty straightforward. Look at the history of homosexuality in France and England. Though these places, at least England, banned homosexuality at once, they had their anti-quote-unquote bugger laws, right? They had to do with, banning homosexuality. They still have a very distinct and shady LGBT history. It's a long story why that is and how they covered it up, and I don't have all the answers in regards to that. Nobody does. So now let's look at the picture on the screen from a documentary I came across on YouTube that was very well done. So what was the rationalization for the lynchings? Right? They said that whites were magically superior to blacks in terms of intelligence, morality, and civilized behavior. You see, denial is not a river in Egypt, and Egypt is not in Europe. The world was civilized from Egypt. And that empire spread its influence. The people who came from Africa migrated to the Middle East. And then eventually Babylon and Persia would spring up. These were places that were not very impressive when the old kingdom of Egypt was around. They were places that learned from African people. The Nile even flowed from south to north, from the blacker parts of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, Uganda, Ethiopia, the sources of the Nile, the white and the blue Nile, what have you. They flowed to the north. All they needed to do was put a boat in the water and get on that boat and row a little bit to go a little faster or something. They'd shoot right up to Egypt. They didn't just trade with Egypt, they established Egypt. And anyone who believes otherwise is obviously some kind of racist piece of trash. They probably think that Harry Potter could beat Shaka Zulu or the best Zulu warrior toe-to-toe, blindfolded or something, because they're so out of touch with reality. They don't understand the history of warfare, the history of religion, the history of civilization. I don't believe that the Americans or Europeans during Jim Crow made that mistake. For the most part, they knew the civilization came from black people, and they threw bitch fit after bitch fit. I'm not here to make fun of them or to call them names. I'm just trying to help you understand and put it in a way that is interesting. They knew damn well that a martial artist is smarter than a mere craftsman, scribe, or scientist. Where it matters most, life intelligence, leadership qualifications, they knew. How many of you can name a single scientist who was alive when George Washington was here in America? Washington crossing the Delaware. Have you heard of that? Or Washington depicted as some kind of military officer. Why was that so important to them? They knew, like the white people after them, that being a martial leader, which what George Washington was superimposed on, is a greater idea than being a mere scientist, craftsman, what have you. And they knew that morality and religion came from warriors. The evidence continued to show us that years and years after that. The early followers of the Egyptian deities were warriors. The python head in Africa, the first religious artifact, it's like 70,000 BC or something. The first known religious and definitively religious artifact had spearheads found by it. The python itself has to do with warfare. So when we look at the rationalization, right, for suppressing black people, for suppressing me, you see that they're not thinking rationally. Ironically, it's called the rationalization. That's how they rationalize it. but it's not the result of rational thought or deep thinking or logical thinking. When these people contemplate, it is a sick joke. When they're deep in thought, they are the laughing stock of the spiritual realm, especially when it involves the greatest warriors. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They don't know what the fuck they're doing, and they ruin their offspring's life to the extreme. I remember when I was a young boy, the late 80s, early 90s, seeing white kids looking very sad, very disgraced, very ashamed of themselves, very ashamed of their families when they talked about slavery. Were the worms before them who thought it was a great idea? The masters of life, the master masons, if you will, utterly disgracing themselves in Freemasonry, to say the least. But there their offspring were, completely humiliated. In the same classroom as Jesus, who they didn't know was Jesus at the time, who they knew was a great basketball player and a brain surgeon's son, utterly humiliated, as they said things like they thought that white people were mentally superior. Here you're in class with a brain surgeon's son, who's mulatto but his father is black, who came here penniless and worked his way up, utterly humiliated. There wasn't a white family at that school that was anywhere near comparable to mine, nowhere near. A private school at that. Privileged children. Way outclassed, way outsmarted. Forced to use the same despicable scale that their forefathers did in the education system, which used to not include black people. Forced to make their laughable arguments in regards to how well you do in the white man's school system when you're the most accepted there, when you're the most common, when it's for you, by you. And over time, not a single one of them would dream of comparing their lives to mine as I'm the top martial artist ever. What the fuck are they? Again, what the fuck are they compared to me? Is it pride speaking through me? Perhaps, but certainly it is God speaking through me. And the opposition view, utterly tail-tucked, not knowing how to man up for a moment, crushed, vanquished, and defeated. Permanently exiled from heaven in utter disgrace. There isn't a military discharge, a dishonorable discharge that is anywhere near as bad as how much the opposition view has failed, how much their adherents are destroyed, dishonorably discharged, crushed, defeated, trampled, smited, overcome. I urge you all to not make the mistake of thinking I'm racist. Look at the two pictures on the bottom of the screen. Now, it didn't capture the full statement, but they were saying that the preachers were teaching that white people were meant to be the leaders. They're meant to be, chosen, what have you. That's what the preachers were teaching. And that the people of color were magically meant to be servants. I remember a eugenicist quote I brought up in my videos some years back, where it said that as soon as the black man is a competitor, his fate is sealed. And here I am being screened out and legally lynched, because the definition of lynching is when, I think they said, 3 or more people come together to cause someone's death. It doesn't matter if they beat them with clubs, or they hung them, or they burn them alive, or they tear them to pieces, things that they've done to black people in this very country. It's when they cause their death as a group. That's the lynching. Those preachers who lied about God for generations, their forefathers. The conservatives' pride and joy is the spirit of those dogs. Here we see their biggest mistake unfolding, the suppression, persecution, and screening out of God's Son. Instead of the Negroes saving the soul of the American people, they were overcome by their childish urge to be conservative and follow in their forefathers' laughable footsteps. It's so laughable that in lynching pictures, I've seen some, at least one that comes to mind, you see them making some kind of smug face. They're laughing. It's laughable in many ways, and one is the fact that the sadistic people, at times at least, were laughing when black people were being killed so that racist white people can feign superiority. At a time where people were very ignorant, and they're still ignorant, mind you, very ugly, right? Messed up teeth, bad health, no deodorant, not using much soap, what have you. Greasy, grimy, scuzzy. And notice in the picture, it should be on the bottom right. It said that interracial breeding would destroy America. Let me be clear on this. America destroyed America. America's refusal to rally and obey God through me. But in the sense that the Christ, the Messiah, is interracial, I find that interesting. My soul absolutely is going to crush the American spirit for their failure. To the one who much is given, much is expected. Why did they rally to me? But also every other nation. That's what it says in your own book, Isaiah 34. The nations will be destroyed, all the nations. The earth is destroyed, their spirits. Everything made new for those who obey God through me, for the righteous who came before me, what have you. It's sad that it came to this. I could be preaching to a group of hundreds of thousands, over 1 million, somewhere right now. Things could have went differently. I could have had good things to say. But you people chose to disgrace yourselves. Why? A huge part of it is upholding the despicable orders of the white, Jewish, and LGBT governing class. And obviously there's token minorities that are helping them out in various clubs and groups, what have you. I think it goes without saying that my official stance on the white, Jew, and LGBT governing class, and I'm saying this as someone who's not racist much, someone who's mixed, I'm part white, part Jewish, is that they are the biggest failures ever possible. And their bloodlines are the most disgraced ever possible. Those who screen out Christ are the lowest forms of life. A lot of you didn't appreciate that in the story. You didn't appreciate Pilate's failure, Herod's failure, Caiaphas' failure, Judas' failure. The real life versions of those ideas are utter trash, cowards, punks, weaklings. Never grew up. Folly is in the heart of a child. Folly is an unruly woman. They are on some unruly bitch shit, and they're on some childish Babylon, baby line bitch shit. That is who they are in essence. That's what dominates them. That's what prevails in them. That's what's overcome them. That's what they've yoked themselves to. That is what they are contaminating you all with. And the only way to cleanse yourself of their filth is to obey God through me before my flesh dies. And we'll see what happens from here. But I'm satisfied that the end will be soon. And I have 2 reasons to hope it is. 1, because this world is a miserable place full of scum where attractive women would rather sleep with child molesters and their allies than date Jesus. And 2, because I've often said the end is soon, and my heart yearns for that moment when it's true, when I finally get to leave this disgusting planet which ruled by the most inferior forms of life that's ever come anywhere in this universe. Thank you.